I have told this story before, to my beta and to no one else, and Eldrick still laughs every time I get to the part about the wolf. I will tell it plainly. It was the 31st night of the autumn misting, the kind that rolls off the hill slopes and sits against the gate stones until the torches burn orange halos in the dark. My court was 2 hours into the weekly feast, the hall loud with voices and the smell of pine tar and roasted meat, and I was halfway through a report on the eastern boundary runs when my wolf lifted his head from where he lay behind my chair. He had been sleeping. He had been sleeping for 3 years, more or less. Not truly sleeping. A wolf does not truly sleep. He watches, he catalogues, he endures. But from the day I turned 31 and my father's bond transferred the full weight of Kelvrath's alpha claim into my chest, my wolf had been doing what I can only describe as waiting in a way that looked, from the outside, exactly like disinterest. He had refused every candidate my beta presented, every woman the neighboring packs sent on good faith, every daughter of every allied alpha who arrived hoping to become Luna of Kelvrath. He would look at them with those yellow eyes, consider them for approximately 4 seconds and look away. I had stopped apologizing for him. I had begun to suspect he was doing it deliberately. So when he lifted his head on the 31st night of the autumn misting, I noticed. He did not look at me, he looked at the door. The outer bell rang. My gate guard, a solid man named Peck who has been at the iron doors for 11 years and has seen most things worth seeing, came inside with the particular expression of someone who is not certain how to explain what is happening at the gate. He crossed the hall, leaned down, and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "Alpha, there is a woman at the gate. She says she is looking for the village of Aldenmere. She appears to have arrived here by mistake." I looked at him. "She came through the outer gate," Peck said, with the gravity of a man announcing an invasion. The outer gate of Kelvrath is marked by 7 carved stone wolves and 2 torches that burn gold rather than orange, because my grandmother thought it looked distinguished. It is not easy to miss. The road that leads to it is also not the road to Aldenmere. The road to Aldenmere goes northeast through the valley. The road to Kelvrath goes west, then up through 3 switchbacks, then through a carved stone arch with the word Kelvrath cut into it in letters that are, I am told, very legible. "She took the wrong road," I said. "It appears so, Alpha." "In the mist." "The mist is heavy tonight, Alpha." I looked at my wolf. He was standing now. Not the slow, reluctant standing of an animal responding to noise, the careful, forward-weighted standing of something that had been waiting a long time and was now, finally, getting to its feet. I told Peck to bring her in so her driver could sort the horses and she could be given directions and a lantern and sent on her way before the mist thickened further. I did not think much of it. I returned to my report. I heard the great doors open. My wolf walked past my chair. This had not happened before, not once in 3 years. He stayed behind my chair during feasts. It was his place. It was where he was comfortable. It was where he watched the room with his slightly contemptuous yellow eyes and judged everyone. He did not move for presented candidates. He did not move for visiting alphas. He did not move for the time Eldrick, my beta, had brought in a northern wolf dancer who was meant to be the most compelling woman in 4 territories, and who was, genuinely, extraordinarily compelling. My wolf had looked at her for 6 seconds instead of 4, which was the closest he had come to interest in 3 years. He walked past my chair, across the length of my great hall, which is a considerable length. Kelvrath is not a modest building. My grandfather had opinions about architecture, past 20-odd pack members who were now going very quiet around him, past the long tables and the fire troughs and the hunting trophies on the east wall, all the way to the great doors. And he sat down and waited. She came in arguing with Peck. Not loudly, not rudely. In the patient, slightly apologetic tone of someone who has been explaining the same reasonable thing for several minutes, and cannot understand why the other person is not grasping it. She was small. She had an ink stain on her left hand that went from her first 2 fingers all the way to her wrist, the kind that accumulates over weeks of close ledger work. She was wearing a traveling cloak that was good quality but 3 years old, the kind kept carefully rather than replaced. She was carrying a satchel. The satchel was clearly heavy. She was managing it without complaint. She was saying to Peck's broad back, "I understand this is a sealed court, and I am genuinely sorry about the gate. I did not know there was a sealed court on this road. The carter said the village was west and then up, and there were no other instructions, and I think the mist may have hidden your signage. So if someone could point me in the correct direction, I would be very grateful and also extremely gone within the next few minutes." She stopped. My wolf was sitting directly in front of her. He was a large wolf. Kelvrath wolves run large, it is the bloodline. He is silver gray with a dark stripe down the spine, and when he sits squarely and looks at something, he tends to make an impression. He was looking at her with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not the 4-second assessment, not the contemptuous disinterest. Something I could only describe, watching it from across the hall, as recognition. Myra, I did not know her name yet, but I will call her what she is, looked back at him. Then she looked around the hall. 60-odd pack members were watching her in absolute silence. She looked at me at the high table. She looked back at the wolf. "Is he all right?" she said. Nobody answered. I do not think anyone was sure what to say. "He looks hungry," she said. She looked at the satchel, clearly considering whether she had anything edible in it. Is he allowed food from people? I have a piece of journey bread in here somewhere. I do not know the rules." My wolf sat down more firmly, in the manner of someone who has made a decision. The hall was so quiet I could hear the fire troughs crackling. I want to be clear that I was not a fool about this. I had been raised to understand the mate bond. My father had described it to me when I was 12, had told me that when it struck, a man knew it the way he knew the sun was up, not by reasoning his way to the conclusion, but by the simple fact that everything looked different and there was no pretending otherwise. He had met my mother at a border negotiation when he was 26. He had been in the middle of a very important point about Eastern grazing rights, he said. He had stopped mid-sentence, looked at her across the table, and understood that the Eastern grazing rights were no longer the most important thing in the room. He had not found this undignified because there was no room for dignity in it. It simply was. I had always thought I would handle it with more composure. I walked down from the high table. This was not a plan. My feet decided to do it and I followed them, which is not how I normally operate. I was aware, distantly, of my entire court watching me do this. I reached the doors. My wolf turned his head and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as, "I have been trying to tell you about this for 3 years." I looked at her. She was looking up at me. She had brown eyes with a quality of steadiness in them that I noticed immediately, the kind that belongs to a person who has had to manage things on her own for a long time and has gotten good at it. She was still holding the satchel. There was a smear of ink on the bridge of her nose that she was clearly unaware of. My chest did something that I will not describe poetically. It was simply a recognition, as if something that had been held slightly wrong for 3 years, some tension I had stopped noticing, settled. My wolf, already sitting at her feet, closed his eyes. I said, "What is your name?" She said, Myra Aldwick. I'm the new record-keeper's apprentice for Aldenmuir's trade ledgers. I was posted there last week. I'm very sorry about the gate. You took the wrong road. The mist was very thick. The signage is not hidden. The letters are quite large. They may have been somewhat mist-obscured, she said carefully, in the tone of someone choosing not to argue with an alpha king in his own great hall, which showed good judgment. I will pay more attention on the way back. Again, I'm extremely sorry. I'll be out of your way. My wolf, I said, Has not come forward for anyone in 3 years. She looked down at him. He was sitting against her left boot with his eyes half shut in the manner of a wolf who has found exactly where he planned to be. I think he might just be friendly, she said. From somewhere behind me, I heard Eldrick make a sound. He turned it into a cough. I heard at least 2 other people also turn things into coughs. He is not friendly, I said. He has never been friendly. Not once in 3 years has he crossed this hall for anyone. She looked at the wolf. She looked at me. She looked at the hall full of very quiet people. She appeared to be doing mathematics. Oh, she said slowly. Oh, I see. I believe, I said, and I was choosing my words with some care because the alternative was to stand in my own great hall and let the bond knock me sideways, which I was not prepared to do in front of 60 people. That you may have arrived at the wrong gate and also, possibly, at exactly the right one. She blinked. I still have a posting in Aldenmere, she said. I accepted it. They're expecting me. I signed the letter. I can write to Aldenmere. I was going to organize their Eastern ledgers. They've apparently been in disorder for 4 years. I have Eastern ledgers, I said. They are also in some disorder. She looked at me for a long moment. My wolf opened one eye, looked at her, and closed it again. This is not, she said carefully, how I expected this posting to go. I should tell you what the court was doing, because it is relevant. The court had gone through 3 phases. The first was the laughter, not cruel but real, the laughter of people who watched a small ink-stained woman argue her way through the outer gate of a sealed wolf court by accident, which is, objectively, a funny thing. I had heard it from the high table. My wolf had heard it too and had stood up in response, which had silenced it. The second phase was the silence when my wolf crossed the hall. My pack knows their wolf. They know what it means when he moves. They had gone very still. The third phase was the watching. As I came down from the high table to stand in front of a record-keeper's apprentice with ink on her nose and a heavy satchel and a wolf against her boot, and said the things I said. I will tell you what happened when I turned back to face them. I had made my decision. It was not technically a decision. It was a recognition of what had already been decided, the way my father had described, the way I had been told it worked. The bond does not ask. It is simply what is. And standing in front of Myra Aldwick with my wolf asleep against her boot and my chest settled for the first time in 3 years, I had no more argument to make. I turned to my court. I said, "This is Myra. She will be staying." They knew what it meant. They were not slow people. 60 faces, and every single one of them shifted, from laughter to silence to something else. The slow understanding moving through the room like the tide coming in. Eldrick, my beta, stood first. He is a broad, gray-haired man with a scar across his jaw and 30 years in this court, and he has the deepest bow of anyone in Kelvrath because he earned it. He looked at Myra with the expression he reserves for things that are real and important, and he bowed. The rest of the court followed. Myra, to her very great credit, did not step backward or make a noise. She stood very still, her satchel in her hands, her wolf court manners non-existent but her composure entirely intact. After a moment she said, in a voice that was only slightly unsteady, "I'm going to need to write a letter to Aldenmere." "I will have someone bring you paper," I said. "And I'll need to know where I'm sleeping. I'll have someone show you." "And I would like," she said, with the air of someone managing an unusual situation by addressing it point by point, "to put this satchel down. It's very heavy." I took it from her. She looked at my hands holding her satchel of ledger books. Something moved across her face, not grand, not dramatic, just a small real thing that I filed away the way you file away the most important things without making a show of it. "Thank you," she said. The week that followed was not graceful. I want to be honest about this. The mate bond, when it is real, is not a small thing. My wolf, who had spent 3 years in a state of patient refusal, became immediately and thoroughly inconvenient. He followed her. He waited outside whichever room she was in. He appeared at mealtimes and sat beside her chair with the dignity of someone who has been doing this his whole life, which he had not. He had been doing this for approximately 4 days and acting as though it were ancient tradition. Myra, for her part, treated him with the matter-of-fact warmth of a person who had clearly always gotten along well with animals, and did not see why a large silver-gray alpha wolf should be any different. She gave him pieces of bread at breakfast. She talked to him when she worked. She had set herself up in the Eastern Records room, which had indeed been in some disorder, and she worked with the focused quiet of someone who found the work genuinely satisfying. I would pass the open door and hear her saying things like, "No, look, this column doesn't match the previous year's grain tally. Someone's been recording in the wrong unit, can you see that?" And my wolf would be sitting next to her chair, watching the ledger which he could not read, with an expression of great interest. I had, in my 34 years, negotiated border disputes, settled succession arguments between neighboring packs, sat through 3-day council meetings in the middle of winter with no fire because the Eastern Holdings heating system had broken down, and my beta had not wanted to be the one to tell me. I had handled difficult things. I found it considerably harder to simply talk to Myra. Not because she was difficult. She was not difficult. She was, I began to understand, extraordinarily easy to be around. She asked sensible questions. She said direct things. She did not manage me or watch her words in the cautious way people sometimes do around an alpha king. She treated me the way she treated the wolf, matter-of-factly, with warmth, without anxiety. It was, I found, extremely destabilizing for someone who was used to a certain amount of management. On the 4th evening, I sat in the records room doorway and watched her working and thought, I have no idea how to do this. My wolf looked at me over his shoulder with an expression that said, "You are making this far more complicated than it needs to be." "I know," I said. Myra looked up. "Were you talking to him?" "Yes." She nodded, unsurprised. "He does seem like someone you can talk to. He's very present." "He is, currently, more present in this room than I am in my own court. Half my council thinks he has lost his mind. And the other half? The other half knows he hasn't, which they find in some ways more alarming." She looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at her. Some kind of communication seemed to pass between them that I was not privy to. "The thing is," Myra said, turning back to the ledger, her ink-stained fingers marking a column, "I have been thinking about this rather carefully. The bond, what it means, what you said at the gate." She paused. "I grew up in a non-wolf family. My mother's people are trade record keepers 3 generations back. I have no wolf. I do not shift. I know what the alpha bond is in theory, but I have no personal experience of any of this." "I know," I said. "So when I think about it," she said, "what I keep coming back to is that your wolf, who is, by your own account and by the account of everyone in this court who looks at me with a very particular expression, your wolf chose me before either of us had said a word, before I'd even put my satchel down, before I'd had a chance to be anything in particular." "Yes, that's," she said, "actually quite something." "It is." She set down her pen. She looked at me in the records room doorway with that steady quality in her eyes that I had noticed at the gate and said, "I don't know this court. I don't know the rules. I didn't know where Kelvrath was 4 days ago. I wrote my name on a letter of posting to Aldenmere, and I fully expected to spend the next year untangling their grain records." She paused. "But I have been here for 4 days, and your wolf brings me bread crusts from the kitchen in the mornings, and your Eastern ledger system is genuinely interesting, and—" She stopped. "And," I said. She looked at her ink-stained hand. She looked at my wolf. She looked at me. "And I think," she said carefully, "that the wrong road may have been the right one." My wolf, at this point, stood up and walked to the doorway and sat between us in a manner that could only be described as smug. I looked at him. He looked at me. I looked at Myra. Myra looked at him, then at me, and the corner of her mouth moved in the way I had been watching for 4 days, the way it did when something struck her as both absurd and also genuinely true. "He's very pleased with himself," she said. "He should be," I said. "He was right. He usually is. He was right for 3 years before you were. I am aware of this. That must be humbling." "It is," I said, "considerably humbling." I stepped out of the doorway and into the room and sat down in the chair across the worktable from her, because it seemed to me that I had been standing in doorways long enough. My wolf settled between our chairs with his head on his paws and an air of accomplished satisfaction. "I want to ask you something." "All right." Not as an alpha asking, as myself. She looked at me steadily. "I can tell the difference," she said. "You are the same either way, mostly, except there's a very slight thing you do with your shoulders when you're speaking for the court. It relaxes just now." I had not known I did that. I filed it away. "What you said just now, the wrong road. I need to know if that is true for you, not for the court, not for what the bond means, for you." She was quiet for a moment. The fire trough in the corner burned low and steady. My wolf breathed. The Eastern ledger sat open on the table between us, 3 years of grain records in her careful handwriting and 4 years of disorder before it. "I have been," she said at last, "a record-keeper's apprentice for 6 years. It is honest work that I am good at, and I have no complaint about it. But I have been good at managing things on my own for a long time because I was expected to be, and I think—" She stopped, started again. "I think there is a difference between managing and being seen." "And your wolf," she said, "looked at me the moment I walked through that gate as though he had been waiting to see me specifically. And then you looked at me, and—" She stopped. "And I said—" "And the way you looked at me," she said quietly, "was the same, as though you already knew me, which you didn't, which makes no sense." "The bond," I said, "does not make logical sense. It is simply what is." "Yes," she looked at her hands. "I think that is exactly what frightens me and also exactly why I trust it." I said nothing for a moment because there was nothing to say that would improve on that. My wolf turned his head and looked at me once, and I thought, "Yes, now." "I would like," I said, "to claim you as my mate, as Luna of Kelvrath. Before the court, as is the tradition, but only if it is what you want. I am not asking on behalf of the bond or on behalf of the wolf or on behalf of my counsel, who have been composing anxious looks at me for 4 days. I am asking you." She looked at me for a long time. "Yes," she said, simply, completely, without qualification. My wolf exhaled a long, slow breath and put his head back on his paws, and I thought, he had been holding that breath for 3 years. We both had. We just hadn't known what we were waiting for. The claiming was not a grand ceremony. My grandmother had described the alpha's claiming as the grandest event a court could witness. The formal robing, the pack assembled at the old stones, the blood mark, the bow. My mother's claiming had been 3 days of ceremony. I had always assumed mine would follow the same shape. What happened was this. I went to the great hall the following morning with Myra beside me and my wolf at her left side. My court was assembled, not because I had called them, but because word in a wolf court travels the way things travel in a wolf court, which is to say it was everywhere before I had finished my first cup of the morning. They were at the long tables, all of them, the full court, the outer pack members who lived in the near territories and had apparently ridden in at dawn because they had heard something was happening at Kelvrath. 60 people, perhaps 80, and Eldrick at the front with that expression he has for things that are real. I brought Myra to stand beside me at the high table. She was wearing the same good-quality traveling cloak, because she had arrived with one bag and it was what she had, and I thought, I will need to do something about this, and then I thought, she will probably have opinions about it, which will be interesting. I said no robing, no ceremony, no 3-day preparation. This is Myra. My wolf chose her 4 nights ago in this hall. I am choosing her now. She is my mate and your Luna. This is what is." There was a silence. And then, I want to be precise about this, because it matters, the court that had laughed at her 4 nights ago, at the ink-stained record-keeper's apprentice who had arrived at the wrong gate by mistake, bowed. Not because I ordered it. Because the bow is what happens when a wolf court recognizes their Luna, and the bond, and the wolf who has been waiting 3 years and finally came forward, and the alpha who finally said the words. Every person in that hall bowed. Myra stood very still beside me. I looked at her profile, that steadiness, that composure, that small person who had argued politely with my gate guard about signage, and then scratched my wolf behind the ears and asked if he was hungry. She turned to me and said, very quietly so only I could hear, "I still owe Aldenmere a letter." "I know," I said. "And their grain records are a problem for whoever comes after me. The Eastern Column discrepancy goes back at least 2 years. I feel responsible." "I will send someone competent," I said. "Our Eastern ledgers are also in disorder." "Yes, I looked at them yesterday. 3 years backlog is achievable, possibly 4 to 5 months of work." I looked at her. My wolf was standing at her left side, surveying the bowing court with an air of long-deserved vindication. "You have been here 4 days," I said, "and you have already scheduled your own work calendar." "I find it helps," she said, "in uncertain situations to know what the next task is." "And the next task for you is the Eastern ledgers." "The Eastern ledgers," she confirmed, "and learning your pack's protocols, which I understand are extensive, and writing to my family, who will be bewildered and possibly acquiring something to wear that isn't this cloak." She paused. "And staying," she said. "That is also on the list. That is first on the list, actually. I may have put the ledgers before it by accident." "I noticed," I said. She looked at me with the full steadiness of those brown eyes and said, "I'm glad I took the wrong road." My wolf has not gone back to waiting. He sleeps soundly now, real sleep, not the patient endurance of 3 years. He sprawls across the records room floor while Myra works, and sometimes he snores, which is something I did not know he was capable of and which I find privately remarkable. He brings her things from the kitchen. Bread crusts. Twice. A piece of dried fish that I do not know where he acquired because we do not normally have dried fish. He is, in short, entirely insufferable in his satisfaction, and I mean this in the warmest possible sense. The Eastern ledgers are nearly sorted. Myra found a systematic error in the grain volume conversion that had been compounding quietly for 7 years, and corrected it with a thoroughness that impressed even my most skeptical council members, who had spent 4 days being skeptical about everything. They are no longer skeptical. A woman who can correct a 7-year compounding ledger error is not a woman whose judgment is questioned twice. The court that bowed does not unbow. That is the nature of it. There was laughter at the gate, and then there was silence, and then there was a wolf crossing a great hall and a bond and a claiming, and after that, the laughter is simply a thing that happened before anyone understood what they were looking at. Now they understand. Eldrick told me, the week after the claiming, that he had known. Not at the gate he had been as surprised as everyone else. But the moment the wolf stood up, he said, he had known. He had felt it in the pack bond, the thing shifting, the held note finally released. 3 years is a long time to wait, he said. He knew what he was waiting for, I said. He was simply not in a position to go and find it. Eldrick smiled, which he does rarely and which looks like sunlight on old stone when he does. She found it for him. She took the wrong road, I said. Yes, Eldrick said, she did. I think about the mist sometimes. The particular mist of that 31st night of autumn, the kind that sits against gate stones and makes torches burn with orange halos. The kind that obscures signage, allegedly, if one is not attending closely. The kind that settles into the valleys and makes the western fork of the road look, I am told, not entirely unlike the northeastern fork if the light is poor. I think about the 7 carved stone wolves. I think about my grandmother's distinguished golden torches. I think about a small woman with a heavy satchel and an ink stain that goes from the first 2 fingers of her left hand all the way to her wrist, arguing patiently with Peck about directions, while a wolf she had never met stood up from a dead sleep and crossed the length of a great hall to come to her. I think about the fact that she had a letter of posting in that satchel, signed, addressed to Aldenmere, a life arranged and planned and reasonably expected. I think about what it means that none of that mattered in the end, because the mist was heavy and the road forked and she took the wrong one. Or she took the only one, and the mist simply helped. My wolf is asleep on the floor of the records room. Myra is at the desk, working through the 5th of the Eastern ledger books, a cup of tea at her elbow that has gone cold because she forgets to drink it when she is concentrating. She has 3 separate colors of ink on her left hand today, and a focused little line between her brows that appears when she finds something interesting in the numbers. In a few minutes I will come in and set a fresh cup beside the cold one, because I have learned that she will drink the fresh one if it appears at the right moment. My wolf will open one eye, register that it is me, and close it again with the air of someone whose household is running exactly as intended. I am not the same man who sat at the high table on the 31st night of the autumn misting, and found, to his very great surprise, that his wolf had better judgment about what mattered than he did. I know what I have now, and I know what it cost nothing in the end, except 3 years of a wolf's patient certainty, and 1 night of heavy mist and a road that forked in exactly the right direction. She looked up from the ledger just now and said, without preamble, "The conversion error in the 5th book is smaller than in the 4th. I think whoever made it corrected themselves partway through and then forgot they'd corrected themselves." "That seems," I said from the doorway, "like a very specific kind of mistake." "It's more common than you'd think," she said. "People do that. They fix something quietly and then they don't tell anyone, and the next person to look at it is confused." She glanced at me with that slight movement at the corner of her mouth. "It's much better to simply say what you know." My wolf opened one eye. I said, "You are right." She smiled. She turned back to the ledger. The fire trough burned steady and low. I stepped in from the doorway finally and sat in the chair across from her and said, "Myra." She looked up. "The wrong road," I said. "I am glad you took it." She held my gaze for a moment, and what was in her eyes was exactly what had been there at the gate. The steadiness, the warmth, the quiet competence of a person who has managed things alone for a long time and has learned, now, that she does not have to. "So am I," she said. And that was all. That is all it needed to be. The wolf slept on. The ledger waited. Outside, somewhere past the iron gates and the 7 carved stone wolves and the golden torches, the road forked the wrong way and the right way, and both of them led here. I have told this story before, to my beta and to no one else, and Eldrick still laughs every time I reach the part about the wolf. I will tell it plainly. It was the 31st night of the autumn misting, the kind that rolls off the hill slopes in long gray curtains and sits against the gate stones until the torches burn orange halos in the dark, and the valley below Kelvrath disappears entirely, and the only proof that the world beyond the walls still exists is the occasional sound of wind in the pines. My court was 2 hours into the weekly feast when my wolf lifted his head from where he lay behind my chair. He had been sleeping. He had been sleeping for 3 years, more or less. Not truly sleeping. A wolf does not truly sleep. He watches, he catalogs, he weighs the room. But for 3 years my wolf had been doing what I can only describe as waiting in a way that looked, from the outside, exactly like disinterest. He had refused every candidate my beta presented, every woman the neighboring packs sent on good faith, every daughter of every allied alpha who arrived at Kelvrath hoping to become Luna. He would look at them with those yellow eyes, consider them for approximately 4 seconds and look away. I had stopped apologizing to the visiting families. I had, at some point in the second year, stopped trying to reason with him about it, and had begun to suspect he knew something I did not. So when he lifted his head on the 31st night of the autumn misting, I noticed. He did not look at me, he looked at the door. The outer bell rang. There are several things I should explain about the outer bell at Kelvrath, because they matter to this story. First, the outer bell is at the outermost gate, which is some distance from the hall. In the normal course of a feast evening, the outer bell does not ring. The court knows when feast evenings are. The outer pack members who live in the near territories know when feast evenings are. Visiting diplomats and allied alphas are scheduled in advance and arrive before the feast begins. Nobody simply rings the outer bell at Kelvrath on a feast evening and expects to be admitted, because the outer gate is 7 carved stone wolves and 2 golden burning torches, and a road that only goes to Kelvrath and takes 3 switchbacks to get there. And the letters KELVRATH are cut into the arch at the top of those switchbacks in letters that are, by every account I have ever received, very legible. Second, Peck had been my gate guard for 11 years. He had a calm and thorough way of handling things. In 11 years, he had never come into the hall during a feast with a complicated expression. He came in with a complicated expression. He crossed the length of the hall, leaned down at my shoulder, and said, quietly enough that the nearby table could not hear, "Alpha, there is a woman at the outer gate. She says she is looking for the village of Aldenmere. She appears to have arrived here by mistake." I set down my cup. She came through the outer gate. She came through the outer gate, Alpha. She took the wrong road. It would appear so, Alpha. In the mist. The mist is quite heavy tonight, Alpha. She mentioned it. The letters are large, Peck. I have not argued with her on that point, Alpha. She is being very reasonable about it. She would simply like directions and a lantern and to be on her way. I looked at this point at my wolf. He was standing. Not the slow, reluctant standing of an animal responding to noise, the careful, deliberate standing of something that had been in a long and patient state of readiness and had now been told. Now, he was facing the door. "Bring her in," I said. "Let the driver sort the horses. She can get her directions and a lantern and be on her way before the mist thickens further." I returned to my report, or I attempted to return to my report. My wolf walked past my chair. In 11 years of alphaship, in 3 years of my wolf's patient and aggravating refusal, he had never walked past my chair during a feast. He stayed behind my chair. It was his place. It was where Kelvrath's alpha wolf rested during formal gatherings. It was where he watched the room with his slightly contemptuous yellow eyes and found everyone present to be of limited interest. The time Eldrick had brought in a northern wolf dancer, said to be the most compelling woman in 4 territories, my wolf had looked at her for 6 seconds, which was the closest he had come to anything in 3 years, and then looked away. The time a visiting alpha had brought his daughter, a kind woman, well regarded in her own territory, my wolf had given her 4 seconds and then gone back to sleep. The time I had, in a moment of privately desperate optimism, invited a woman from the Westlands who had been described to me in 7 separate letters as extraordinary. My wolf had not even opened his eyes. He walked past my chair, across the full length of the great hall of Kelvrath, which is a considerable distance because my grandfather had opinions about architecture and Kelvrath is not a building designed for modesty. Past the nearest table, past the fire troughs, past the hunting trophies on the east wall, past the old tapestries on the west, past 60-odd pack members who were going increasingly quiet in his wake, because 60 people watching an alpha's wolf move with that kind of purpose will go quiet. He reached the great doors. He sat down. He waited. The hall was not yet entirely silent. There were still the sounds of the feast, cups set down, the low crackle of the fire troughs, someone at the far table saying something in a normal voice, and then stopping when the person next to them touched their arm. 60 people finding a reason to watch the great doors. I was one of them. I was watching my wolf sit at the doors with a stillness that was not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of having arrived. And I was aware that the report in my hands had stopped mattering, and that Eldrick to my left was looking at my wolf with an expression I had not seen on him before, and that I was about to understand something I was not entirely prepared to understand. The doors opened. She came in arguing with Peck. Not loudly, not rudely. In the patient, slightly apologetic tone of someone who has been explaining a reasonable thing for several minutes and is beginning to think the other person is not going to grasp it, but who is too polite to say so directly. She was small, not short exactly, but contained in the way of a person who has learned to take up exactly the space she needs and no more, and has gotten good at it. She had an ink stain on her left hand that went from the first 2 fingers all the way to the wrist, not the fresh stain of an afternoon's work, but the deep-settled kind that accumulates over weeks of close ledger work, the kind that does not entirely wash out. She was wearing a traveling cloak in dark green, good quality but 3 years old, the kind that a careful person keeps in good repair rather than replaces. She was carrying a satchel. The satchel was clearly heavy. She was managing it without complaint and without shifting it to the other shoulder, the practiced ease of someone who has carried that weight a long time. She was saying to Peck's broad back, "I understand entirely that this is a sealed court, and I am genuinely sorry about the gate. I did not know there was a sealed court on this road. My instructions said west and then up, and there were no other details, and the carter said he was sure of the road, and I think the mist may have made the signage difficult to read." She stopped. My wolf was sitting directly in front of her. She looked at him. He was a large wolf. Kelvrath wolves run large. It is in the bloodline. He is silver-gray with a dark stripe down the spine, and when he sits squarely and faces something, he tends to fill the space in front of the doors in a way that suggests there is no going back through them without his permission. He was looking at her with an expression I had not seen on him before in 3 years of watching him dismiss everyone placed in front of him, not the 4-second assessment. Not the contemptuous stillness, something that I could only describe, watching it from the high table, as recognition, the particular quality of looking at something you expected to see. Myra looked back at him. I will tell you what happened in her face because it is worth telling. She did not step back. She did not startle. She stood still for a moment, looking at my wolf looking at her, and then she looked around the great hall at the long tables, the fire troughs, the 60-odd people who were watching her in complete silence, and then she looked at me at the high table. I do not know what she saw in my face in that moment. I was not attending to my own face. She looked back at the wolf. "Is he all right?" she said. Nobody answered. I do not think anyone was certain what to say. 60 people held very still. "He looks hungry," she said. She looked at the satchel on her shoulder, clearly considering the question of whether she had anything edible inside it. Is he allowed food from people? I have a piece of journey bread in here somewhere. I don't know the rules about that. I'm sorry, I don't know your rules about most things. I didn't expect to be here." My wolf sat down more firmly, in the manner of someone who has made a decision and is not going to be argued out of it. I heard the fire troughs crackling. I heard nothing else. Then I got up from the high table. I want to be clear that this was not a plan. My feet decided to do it. In 34 years I had made a great many decisions, and I had generally made them deliberately and in full possession of the relevant information. This was not one of those decisions. I got to my feet and I walked down from the high table, and I crossed the length of the great hall of Kelvrath, because my wolf was at the doors, and there was a woman with an ink stain and a satchel of ledger books standing in front of him, and whatever was happening in my chest, some settling, some ceasing of a low tension I had not known was constant, told me that I needed to close that distance. 60 people watched me do this. I reached the doors. My wolf turned his head and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as, "I have been trying to tell you this for 3 years, and you could not hear me." I looked at her. She was looking up at me. She had brown eyes with something in them, a quality of steadiness that I noticed before I noticed anything else about her. Not the practiced poise of a woman trained for courts, not the careful assessment of someone calculating her position. Simply steadiness, the kind that belongs to a person who has had to manage things on their own for a long time and has gotten so good at it that managing is simply her natural state, without drama or complaint. There was a smear of ink on the bridge of her nose that she was clearly not aware of. She was holding her satchel with both hands in front of her. My chest did something I will not describe poetically, because the description would not add anything. It was, simply, a recognition, as if something had been held at a slight wrong angle for 3 years and had now, without ceremony, settled into the right one. My wolf, already seated at her feet, closed his eyes. "What is your name?" I said. "Myra," she said. "Myra Aldwick. I'm posted to Aldenmere as the new record-keeper's apprentice for their trade ledgers. I arrived at Kelvrath by mistake. I'm extremely sorry about the gate. I would like directions to Aldenmere and a lantern and to be on my way as quickly as possible, and I understand this is an imposition on your feast evening, and I am genuinely sorry." "You took the wrong road," I said. The mist was very heavy. "The letters on the arch are large." "They may have been somewhat obscured," she said carefully, in the tone of someone choosing words with precision in front of a great many people. "I'll pay more attention on the return journey." "My wolf," I said, "has not crossed this hall for anyone in 3 years." She looked down at him. He was sitting pressed against her left boot, with an expression of profound and settled contentment, his eyes half shut, his massive silver-gray side warm against her traveling cloak. "I think," she said after a moment, "that he might simply be friendly." From behind me, I heard Eldrick make a sound. He turned it into a cough, which was good of him. I heard at least 2 other people also decide that they needed to cough. "He is not friendly," I said. "He is not, in the conventional sense, friendly. He has not crossed this hall for any person in 3 years. He has refused every candidate my council has presented. He has been, in the characterization of every person who has observed him in this period, difficult." "Oh," she said. She looked at the wolf, she looked at me. She looked at the hall full of very quiet people. I watched the information settle on her, the particular settling of a person doing arithmetic they had not expected to do that evening. "Oh, I see." "I believe," I said, and I was choosing my words with some care, "that you may have arrived at the wrong gate and also, possibly, at the right one." She was quiet for a moment. "I still have a posting in Aldenmere," she said finally. "I signed the letter. They're expecting me. I was going to organize their Eastern trade ledgers. They've been in some disorder, apparently, for 4 years." "I have Eastern ledgers," I said. "They are also in some disorder." A longer silence. "This is not," she said, "how I expected this posting to go." "No," I agreed, "nor I this feast." She looked at me. At the wolf. At the hall. At me again. The steadiness in her eyes did not waver, though I could see the effort of it, not fear, nothing like fear, but the careful concentration of a person who had landed somewhere unexpected and was doing the work of orienting themselves in real time. "I'll need somewhere to sleep tonight," she said at last, "while I think about this." "I'll have someone show you," I said. "And something to eat. I haven't had supper." "You can eat here." "In the feast." "In the feast." She looked at the feast. The 60-odd members of Kelvrath's court looked back at her. My wolf opened one eye, registered that the matter was settled to his satisfaction, and closed it again. "All right," said Myra Aldwick. "Thank you. I'll need to write to Aldenmere in the morning. I'll have paper brought to your room. I also," she said, looking at the satchel, "need to put this down somewhere. It's very heavy. I've been carrying it since dawn." I took it from her. She looked at my hands holding her satchel of ledger books, a king's hands holding a record-keeper's work-bag, and something moved in her face that was small and real and not for the hall. I filed it away with the care I give to things that matter. "Thank you," she said. I led her to a seat at the nearest table. My wolf walked beside her. The feast, which had been silent for perhaps 5 full minutes, began very slowly to resume its sounds, the cautious picking up of cups, the careful resumption of conversation, the murmur of 60 people recalibrating what they had just seen. I went back to the high table. I did not resume the report. Eldrick leaned toward me and said, very quietly, "Alpha." "I know," I said. "He came forward," Eldrick said. "I know, Eldrick. In 3 years he has not." "I know." Eldrick was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if he was hungry. "I heard. She was going to give him journey bread." "I am aware." He was quiet again. Then, after a pause during which I did not look at him because I did not want to see the expression I knew he was wearing, "She's the one, then?" "Yes," I said. "Well," said Eldrick, and I heard something in his voice that sounded, for a man who does not readily show warmth in public settings, very much like relief. "Good." The night passed in a way I could not entirely account for afterward. I know what the feast finished. I know that Myra ate at the nearest table with my wolf beside her chair, and that she talked to him in the quiet matter-of-fact way she had. I could not hear it from the high table, only see it, and that at some point she said something that made the woman beside her laugh, and the two of them were talking. I know that when the feast ended and people began to move toward their rooms or the outer court or home through the now thinning mist, Myra stood and looked around with the small, alert look of a person in an unfamiliar space cataloging exits and landmarks, and that my wolf stood with her. I had a steward show her to the guest rooms in the East Wing, which are comfortable and private, and as far from the noise of the outer court as any room in Kelvrath. I had paper and ink sent to her room. I had a tray of food sent, because the feast portions at that table had been ordinary and she had said she had not eaten since dawn. I went to my own study and sat down at my desk and looked at the wall for a while. Eldrick came in. "You are staring at the wall," he said. "I am aware of what I am doing, Eldrick." He sat down across from me. He is a broad, gray-haired man with a scar across his jaw and 30 years in this court, and he has the gift of sitting in a room with a person who is thinking without feeling any particular need to interrupt. He sat for some time. 3 years, I said. Yes. He knew. He was always going to know. Wolves know things, Eldrick said. You have always known this. I thought I stopped. I thought perhaps he was simply defective. In the 2nd year, I thought perhaps the bond would not come for me, that it was something some alphas simply did not have. I know you thought that. I did not say so. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. She seems capable. She is a record keeper. She corrected the gate guard's account of the road conditions without being rude about it. She ate in a room full of strangers without showing discomfort. She talked to your wolf as though he were simply a large dog she had met in a doorway. He paused. These are not small things, Alpha. Adapting to unexpected circumstances without losing your footing. That is not a nothing quality. I looked at my desk. There was a report on it that I had been, until this evening, quite interested in. I was not interested in it now. She said she had a posting. Yes. A letter signed. A record-keeper's apprentice sent to organize trade ledgers in a provincial village, Eldrick said. I do not think this is an unmovable circumstance. She signed the letter. People adjust their plans, he said. When larger things happen, he stood. You should sleep, Alpha. There is time to do this correctly. He moved toward the door, then stopped. He is in her room, by the way. I looked up. Your wolf, the steward told me. He followed her to the east wing, and she did not close the door before he was through it, and at that point she apparently considered the situation and said, "All right, but you'll have to sleep on the floor." Eldrick allowed himself the small, precise smile he reserves for things he finds genuinely good. He is on the floor. I am told he is asleep. I sat with that for a moment. He hasn't slept, I said. Not really in 3 years. No, Eldrick said, he hasn't. He left. I sat at my desk for a little longer, and then I went to sleep too, and I slept better than I had in 3 years, which told me something that I was not yet ready to say out loud. The week that followed was not graceful. I want to be honest about this, because the stories people tell about the mate bond tend toward the grand, the ceremony, the immediate and total recognition, the moment when everything resolves cleanly and completely, and the world arranges itself around the new fact. What happened between Myra and me in the 7 days after she arrived at the wrong gate was considerably less arranged than that. She woke on the second morning and went directly to find the Eastern Records room. This I learned from the steward, who reported it with the expression of someone conveying information he finds somewhat unexpected. Apparently Myra had asked over breakfast where the estate records were kept, had been shown to the Eastern Records room, had opened the first ledger book, had said not to anyone in particular since she was alone at that point. Oh, this is actually quite interesting, the conversion method is wrong, and had been there ever since. I found her there at mid-morning. She was at the long work table with 3 ledger books open in front of her, a cup of tea that had gone cold at her elbow, her ink-stained left hand making quick notes in a margin. My wolf was on the floor beside her chair. He opened one eye when I appeared in the doorway, registered my presence, and closed it again with an air of satisfaction. "Good morning," I said. She looked up. She had been deep in the numbers, and she surfaced from them with the particular slight blinking of a person who has been somewhere else in their head. "Good morning. I'm sorry, I should have asked permission to be in here. I asked the steward and he said it was all right, but I should have asked you directly. I apologize." "You don't need to apologize. The conversion error in the grain volumes goes back at least 3 years, she said. Possibly 4, but the 4th book is harder to read. Someone changed their hand partway through and the earlier sections are cramped. She looked at the page. It's not a large error per entry, but it compounds. Yes. Someone has been recording in the Northern Standard rather than the Kelvrath Standard. They're close, but not identical. Over 4 years, the difference in the tallied grain reserve would be, she did a quick calculation in the margin, meaningful, not catastrophic, but meaningful. She looked at me. "Do you want me to keep going?" I looked at her, at my wolf asleep on the floor, at the ledger books open in front of her, the marginal notes in her careful hand, the cold tea at her elbow. "Yes," I said, "keep going." She nodded and returned to the page. I stood in the doorway for another moment, and then, because standing in doorways had a limit to its usefulness, I brought a chair in and sat down across the table from her, and we worked in the same room in the quiet that comes when 2 people are comfortable enough to be silent together, which I had not expected to be possible on the second morning of knowing her. My wolf at some point began to snore softly. "Does he usually do that?" Myra asked, not looking up. "I have never heard him do it before." She looked at the wolf. Something moved in her face. Then she looked back at the ledger. "He's very settled," she said. And that was all, but there was something in how she said it, a small quiet thing that stayed with me through the rest of the morning. The days took a shape. She worked in the records room in the mornings. She had lunch with whoever was nearby, usually one of the junior court members who had, I noticed, begun to find reasons to be near the records room at midday. She walked the outer court in the afternoon, learning the layout of Kelvrath with the systematic thoroughness of a person building a mental map, asking questions of anyone who would answer them. She was not performing interest in Kelvrath. She was genuinely interested in the architecture, in how the guard rotation worked, in why the western stores were built upslope of the main buildings, drainage. As it turned out, a decision my great-grandmother had made for reasons Myra found entirely sensible. She was, I understood slowly, someone for whom understanding a place was not a social act but a practical one. She wanted to know how things worked. She asked the people who knew. My wolf followed her everywhere. This was noticed by everyone. The junior court members who found reasons to be near the records room at midday also found reasons to be near wherever my wolf was, because where my wolf was, increasingly, was wherever Myra was, and this created a kind of informal orbit around her that I observed with a feeling I could not quite name. I kept a careful distance, not because I wanted to, because I was aware that I was the Alpha King of Kelvrath and she had arrived 4 days ago by accident, and the bond was mine more than hers. She did not have a wolf. She did not feel the pull of it the way I did. She had to come to it on her own terms and in her own time, and it was not mine to press. So I was careful. I spent the days watching my wolf make no effort at careful distance whatsoever, and I spent the evenings at my desk doing a great deal of thinking about things that were not the Eastern ledgers. On the 4th evening, I came to the records room doorway at the end of the working day and found her still at the table, the 5th ledger book open, a new cup of tea at her elbow that had also gone cold. My wolf was on the floor. She was talking to him. The 4th book and the 5th book use different notations for the seasonal tallies, she was saying, her finger tracing a column. The 4th book records by market week and the 5th by calendar week. There are 4 fewer market weeks per year than calendar weeks, so the comparison is here, see this. This is why the totals don't align. It's not corruption, it's a notation shift. Whoever took over in the 5th book changed the method and didn't note the change. My wolf looked at the page with great interest. "You can't read," she said to him, not unkindly, "but you seem interested anyway, that's something." I sat down in the chair by the door, the one I had begun to think of as mine in this room, which was a thought I did not examine too closely. She looked up at me. "I've been talking to your wolf," she said. "I know, he seems to enjoy it. He's very good at listening, he has a very present quality. Some people listen but they're elsewhere in their head, he's never elsewhere." She set down the pen. She looked at her ink-stained hand. "I have been thinking," she said. "I know. About the bond, about what you said at the gate." She did not look at me while she said it, and I thought, she is being careful with the words, choosing them, and I should not hurry her. I grew up without pack. My mother's family are trade record keepers, 3 generations. There is no wolf in our bloodline. I know what the mate bond is in theory. I have read about it. It comes up in the history of the trade agreements I work with. It is mentioned in several of the contexts where a Luna's authority carries weight in a contract, but I have no experience of it, no sense of it, from my side. "I know," I said. "So for me it is, I am doing this from the outside in. You felt something at the gate. Your wolf knew something before the gate. For me it is simply," she stopped. "I am trying to explain what I am actually experiencing rather than what I think I should be experiencing, because I think the second kind of explanation would not be useful to either of us." "Tell me the first kind," I said. She was quiet for a moment. The fire trough in the corner burned low and steady. Outside, through the narrow eastern window, the mist had come down early. "I was going to spend a year in Aldenmere," she said. "I had a clear picture of what that year would look like. I have had a clear picture of the next several years, actually. Work, competence, doing the job well. I have always been good at knowing what the next task is and doing it well. That is the shape of my life, and I have been content in it." She paused. "And then I took a wrong road in the mist, and I walked into a hall full of strangers, and your wolf crossed that hall and sat down at my boots before I had a chance to be anything in particular, before I had said a useful thing, before I had done anything. He just came." She stopped. "I have never had anyone simply come to me before. I have always had to be useful first." I did not say anything for a moment. "He didn't come because you were useful," I said. "He came because you are you." She looked at me. The steadiness in her eyes was the same, but there was something underneath it now, something that was not fear and was not uncertainty, but was the careful particular fragility of a person hearing something they had not been told before and not quite knowing where to put it. "I know," she said quietly. "That's what I mean, she stopped. "That is what I have been thinking about." My wolf on the floor turned his head and looked at me. The look was clear. "Say the thing." "I want to ask you something," I said. "All right. I am going to ask it as myself, not as the alpha of this court. I want you to answer it the same way." She looked at me carefully and nodded. "Do you want to stay?" I said. "Not for the bond, not for me, for you. Is this," I paused, "is this a place you would choose if you had the choice freely? Because you do have the choice freely. Whatever the bond does on my side and whatever my wolf decided before you even put your satchel down, you have the choice. That will always be true." She was quiet for a long time. The fire trough burned. My wolf breathed. "The Eastern ledgers," she said at last, "are going to take at least 4 months to fully correct, possibly 5. The conversion error is deeper than I thought, and there are 2 notation shifts and a recording method change that someone didn't document. It is genuinely interesting work." "Yes," I said. "Kelvrath's architecture is unusual. Your great-grandmother made several structural decisions I would like to understand better. Your gate guard Peck is an interesting person. The woman at the noon table who showed me the Western stores." "Solly," I said. "Solly. She explained 3 things about the seasonal supply arrangements that I had not considered before and that are, actually, relevant to how the ledger discrepancy compounds over the calendar year. I would like to talk to her more." She paused. "And your wolf has brought me 3 pieces of bread and 1 piece of dried fish, whose provenance I have not asked about. And I have found myself looking forward to him arriving in the morning, which is not something I expected to feel about a wolf." I waited. "And when you come to this doorway in the evenings," she said more quietly, "I find that I am also looking forward to that, that is also not something I expected." "Myra," I said. "Yes. I am looking forward to being in the doorway, in case that was unclear." She looked at me, at the wolf. Something moved across her face that I wanted to study for a long time, not in this moment, but in many moments, all the ordinary moments that the word staying contains. "The wrong road may have been the right one," she said. Quietly, conclusively, the way she said things when she had finished the arithmetic and was stating the answer. My wolf stood up. He walked to the doorway and sat between us, in the manner of someone whose household is proceeding as intended. "He's very pleased with himself," she said. "He should be. He was right." I looked at the wolf, then at her. "He was right for 3 years before I understood what he was waiting for." "That must be humbling." "It is the most humbling thing that has ever happened to me," I said, without exaggeration. "He has the patience of something ancient, and he knew what I did not, and he sat by my chair for 3 years and waited, and not once did he make me feel I had failed, only that the time had not come yet." I looked at him. "And then you walked through the wrong gate, and the time came." She looked at my wolf for a moment, that matter-of-fact warmth she gave him, unchanged since she had first asked if he was hungry in the doorway of the great hall. Then she looked at me. "I'll write to Aldenmere in the morning," she said. "Yes." "And I'll stay." "Yes," I said. And I stepped out of the doorway at last and sat in the chair across from her, and my wolf put his chin on the edge of the table between us with an air of accomplished satisfaction. And outside the narrow window, the mist sat heavy against the gate stones, and the golden torches burned their halos in the dark. And for the first time in 3 years, everything in Kelvrath felt entirely and correctly arranged. The claiming was the following morning. I had intended to plan it, to give it the ceremony it deserved, the assembled pack, the old stones, the formal rite. My grandmother's describing of the claiming she had witnessed had included flowers brought from the lowland markets and 4 days of feasting, and a blessing from the border keeper who held the eastern territories. I had always assumed there would be preparation. What happened instead was that word traveled the way word travels in a wolf court, which is to say it was everywhere before I had finished breakfast. I do not know who said what to whom. I suspect my wolf, whose communication with the pack bond is more fluent than mine has ever been, had something to do with it. By the time I came to the great hall with Myra beside me and my wolf at her left, the hall was full. Not just the regular court. The outer pack members who lived in the near territories, riders who had come in at dawn, people who had been in the middle of morning work and had stopped and come. 80 people, perhaps more. Eldrick at the front in his full beta position, with the expression he reserves for things that are real and right. I brought Myra to stand at the high table. She was wearing the green traveling cloak because she had arrived with one bag and it was what she had. I had noticed this in the way I had begun to notice all of the small practical facts of her life, filing each one away. I thought, I will need to do something about this. And then I thought, she will have opinions about it. And the thought of her having opinions about it made something in my chest do the thing it had been doing since the gate. I said, this is Myra. My wolf chose her 5 nights ago in this hall. I am choosing her now. She is my mate and your Luna. This is what is. There was a silence. Then Eldrick bowed. He is a man of 30 years in this court, and he has a bow that means something because he does not give it lightly. He bowed, and the court, the hall full of people who had laughed at the ink-stained record-keeper's apprentice who argued with the gate guard about mist and signage, who had come in through the wrong gate in the dark, who had scratched my wolf behind the ears and asked if he was hungry. The court bowed. All of them, every person in that hall. Myra stood still. I had been watching her from the corner of my eye, the steadiness, the composure, the small person who manages things and does not make a show of it. She stood still through the bow, and when the court straightened, she turned to me. I would like, she said quietly, to say something to them, if that is all right. It is your hall, I said. It is entirely all right. She faced the court. She held herself well, not with the practiced bearing of someone trained for this, but with the natural upright quality of a person who stands squarely on her own ground because she has been doing it for years. She said, I came through your gate by accident 5 nights ago. I know that. I know that some of you thought it was funny, and I think it was funny too, honestly. I was arguing with your gate guard about the signage when your Alpha's wolf was sitting in front of the great doors, which I did not realize until I was inside, at which point I missed an opportunity to say something more dignified than asking if he was hungry. A sound moved through the hall, not quite laughter, something warmer. I don't know your court, she said. I don't know your protocols. I don't know your history or your bloodlines or how things are done here. I will need to learn all of it, and I will probably make errors, and I would like to ask for some patience on that front. She paused. But I can tell you this. I came in through the wrong gate on a mist-heavy night with a heavy satchel and a posting to somewhere else entirely, and your wolf crossed your hall for me before I had done a single thing to deserve it. And in 5 days in this court I have found people who are honest, and a record system that is interesting, and a gate guard who didn't throw me out when he probably could have, and an architecture I find genuinely fascinating. She stopped. I will learn the rest. I want to learn the rest. I would like very much to be here. She stopped. The hall was quiet for a moment. Then Sally, from the second table, began to applaud. She is not a person who makes a habit of applause in formal settings, and she did it anyway, and the hall followed. Myra looked at me, mildly surprised. They like you, I said. I haven't done anything yet. You told them the truth, I said. In a court that is not nothing. The days that settled into place after the claiming were not the days of ceremony. They were the days of ordinary life, which is where everything real lives. Myra worked. She was not performing diligence. She was simply diligent, the way she was simply steady, the way she was simply warm, because these were her qualities and she had had them long before anyone recognized them, and she kept them now the same way she kept the green cloak, carefully, in good repair, without making a show of it. The Eastern ledgers took 4 months and 3 weeks, which was 1 month longer than she had estimated because she found a third notation shift that had been hidden inside the 5th book's archive pages. The final corrected accounts showed a grain reserve that was 14% higher than the previous tallies had suggested. My store's master, a skeptical man named Hendrell who had been unconvinced of everything for 22 years, looked at the corrected figures for a long time and then said to Myra, "These are right," which from Hendrell was an extraordinary thing to say to a person who had arrived 5 months earlier through the wrong gate. She learned the court. She asked questions of Peck, of Solly, of the archive keeper who had the Eastern Wing's historical records, of the junior court members who had begun showing up at the noon table, because she was there, and the conversation was good. She learned the protocols and she kept them, not with the stiff exactness of a person managing unfamiliar rules, but with the ease of a person who finds rules intelligible and is glad to know them. She sat in on the weekly council meetings and listened, and when she had been at 3 of them, she asked a question about the Western Boundary Run records that made my boundary warden rethink something he had been doing the same way for 6 years. He changed the method. It was better. My wolf, meanwhile, had become a creature I barely recognized. Not a different wolf, the same animal, the same yellow eyes, the same slight contemptuous assessment of everything he judged unworthy. But he slept. He slept properly, the long settled sleep of a creature who is no longer holding a vigil. He brought Myra things from the kitchen: bread, the occasional piece of cheese, twice something from the outer stores that I could not identify and did not ask about. He appeared at council meetings and lay under the table near her chair. And the first time this happened, Eldrick looked at me, and I looked at Eldrick, and we did not say anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said. I was, in the early weeks, still careful. I brought her fresh cups of tea when the ones at her elbow went cold. I came to the records room doorway in the evenings and did not hover. I walked the outer court with her when she asked if I could spare an hour, and I answered her questions about the architecture and the bloodlines and the Eastern boundary protocols, and I listened to her ask them with the genuine interest that was simply her quality, not performing curiosity, simply curious, the way she was simply everything she was. One evening, 6 weeks after the claiming, she looked up from the ledger and said, "You've been very careful." I looked at her. "Yes. You don't have to be." "I know. I'm not going anywhere," she said. She said it simply, with the same quality she said the things she had finished calculating. "I've written to my family. I've written to Aldenmuir. They found a good replacement, apparently, someone with more experience than I have. I've put down what I'm going to put down here." She looked at the ledger book. "You don't have to stay in doorways." I thought about my father and the Eastern grazing rights, and the moment that had stopped mattering. "I know," I said, and I came in and sat down, and that was that. What I want to tell you in the end is not the ceremony. It is not the bow, though I will carry the bow with me. 60 people bowing to the woman who asked my wolf if he was hungry, the woman who stood in the hall and said, "I came through your gate by accident, and I find your architecture genuinely fascinating," the woman who had the steadiness to stand still when the thing she had not expected arrived and would not leave. What I want to tell you is the morning I stopped at the records room door, not the East Wing doorway, a different one, the small room off the main court where she had taken to working once the Eastern ledgers were done, and she had moved on to the archive project she had proposed, a thorough indexing of Kelvrath's historical records that no one had done in 40 years, and I heard her talking to my wolf. Third generation of the boundary records uses a different date system than the fourth, she was saying. So when they cross-reference you have to convert, and the conversion is not hard but nobody wrote it down anywhere, so each archivist who takes over probably rederives it from scratch, which is it's fine, it works, but it's inefficient. If someone just wrote it down. She paused. I'm going to write it down, in the index in the front matter, so the next person doesn't have to rederive it. My wolf, as best I could tell, was listening with his customary quality of great present attention. You're very helpful to talk to, she said. You never disagree. I said from the doorway, he disagrees. He simply expresses it in different ways. She looked up. She smiled, the full version, not the corner of the mouth movement I had catalogued in the early days, but the real one, the one I had come to know as particular to her and unrepeatable. Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to write a conversion guide into the front matter of the archive index for future archivists. That is a very good idea. It'll take an extra week. The archive is 40 years uncatalogued. An extra week is not a problem. She nodded and returned to the page. I came in and sat in the chair, my chair, in whichever room she was working that had been my chair since the third day, and the wolf put his head on the table between us, and I looked at him and thought, yes, you were right, you were always going to be right, and I should have listened sooner, but here we are. He closed his eyes. There is one more thing I want to tell. My beta Eldrick, in the month after the claiming, told me what he had observed. Not at the gate he had been as surprised as anyone. But in the moment the wolf stood up, before I had moved from the high table, before the doors had opened, he had felt something in the pack bond. Not the wolf's movement, he had seen that with his eyes. Something else. He described it as a note that had been held slightly wrong for a long time, and was suddenly, without ceremony, corrected. The whole court felt it, he said. Not everyone would have words for it, but they felt it. Something settled, like a door that had been open in the wrong season and was finally closed. He paused. They were not laughing by the time she was through the door. Not because they had been corrected, they laughed and then they felt the bond settle and the laughter simply was over. It had served its purpose. What purpose? I said. Clearing the air, he said, which is the most Eldrick answer in the world. You cannot receive something without a moment of ordinary air before it. The laughter was the ordinary air. Then the wolf stood up, and the ordinariness was done. I have thought about that. I think he is right. She came through the gate in the ordinary way, by accident, by mistake, by a mist-heavy road that forked in the wrong direction, and there was laughter because that is what ordinary things get, and then the ordinary was over, and what was underneath it was simply true. This is the thing about the mate bond. It does not announce itself. It does not arrange the circumstances to be impressive. It finds its own road, even when the road is the wrong one, even when the person on it is arguing with the gate guard about mist and signage, and would very much like some directions and a lantern. My wolf knew. I should have listened sooner. I am glad he waited. I am in the records room now as I write this, the one off the main court, with the narrow north-facing window and the good candlelight and the shelves of historical volumes that Myra is working through systematically, volume by volume, building an index that will outlast us both. She is at the table. She is working on the fourth generation of boundary records. My wolf is on the floor. He is snoring, which he does now, which is a thing I did not know he could do. She looked up a few minutes ago and said, without preamble, the conversion guide for the third to fourth generation date system is done. I've written it into the front matter. Anyone who comes after us will have it. Good, I said. I'm going to add a note about the Eastern Ledger conversion error, too. As a cautionary note, in case someone in the future switches measurement standards without noting it. Also good. She looked at me for a moment with those steady brown eyes. You're recording this conversation. I am writing something, I said. About the gate night. About the gate night. Are you going to mention the journey bread? I have mentioned the journey bread. She looked back at her work. The corner of her mouth moved. Good. It was a reasonable thing to offer. I stand by it. So do I said. So does he. My wolf opened one eye. He looked at her. He closed it again and went back to sleep. And in the warmth of the records room, with the mist outside and the candles burning and the 40-year uncatalogued archive slowly becoming a thing that people after us would be able to use, I finished writing this. The wrong road brought her through my gate. The mist was heavy, the letters were large, and she came through anyway, with her satchel and her ink-stained hand and her steadiness. And my wolf crossed the hall, and everything that had been held at a slight wrong angle settled, and I sat in my doorways for too many evenings before I stopped. But I stopped. She stayed. That is the story. That is all of it. The rest is the ordinary days which are, as it turns out, everything.